Okay, so now we are recording, but it's just 2 o'clock, so my timing is right on. So again, welcome. This is our webinar today. We're looking at accreditation and outcomes-based education. We'll also be talking about assessment because that's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. When I was the provost at Menlo College, Melanie actually came to, Melanie Booth, who's one of our presenters today, came and was very helpful in helping us understand how assessment is becoming such an important part of accreditation today. And I have to say, you know, when I first got to Menlo College in July of 2015, we were just in the process of starting our accreditation process. And so we had just submitted our self-report. And so I started as provost right in the middle of the process, basically. And so as we went through the process over the next year, it was, you know, really interesting to see how that whole process was different than when I'd gone through it when I was at University of Texas at Austin about 10 years earlier. We had gone through that process around 2006 or so. And back then, assessment was just starting to make its way into the conversation. And so I remember as a faculty member having to put, you know, they're like, oh, you have to include outcomes in your syllabi. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I can do outcomes. But what was interesting to me is, you know, when I started doing this process at Menlo College, you know, assessment and outcomes-based education had, you know, become a much more expanded thing. And so I had to learn not only about course outcomes, but program outcomes and you know, institutional outcomes. You know, so I had to pull together everybody around campus and say, guys, you know, everybody has to have, you know, their learning outcomes and program outcomes. And you know, it was a whole new thing for everybody. And, you know, especially for, you know, student affairs and other parts of campus, they had a really hard time understanding why this was an important thing. And for those of you who are joining, I'm chit-chatting, giving people time to join in. We'll start in the official startup in just a couple minutes here. Yeah, so actually I'm beholden to Melanie for, you know, her help when we were going through the accreditation process and learning how to do assessment. And, you know, she's a great, so just to introduce her, those of you who are joining us, Melanie Booth has you know, been affiliated with WASC and is a really great expert on a variety of issues related to accreditation and assessment. And today we're going to be getting a demonstration on outcomes-based education and assessment from Ioncudos. And as I was saying before, one of the reasons this is really interesting to me is as a provost, I wish I had had these kinds of tools because for one thing, I think having these kinds of tools actually helps faculty understand the process of assessment and accreditation because it puts it in a more formal, you know, we had to create these things when I was at Menlo College. We had to create, you know, we had a really great institutional effectiveness director who walked us through this process of how do you get to not just course learning outcomes, but program learning outcomes. And one of the biggest changes from the, you know, I was mentioning earlier that one of the things I had to focus in on as a provost was very different from when I was at UT Austin, going through SACS accreditation back in the mid 2006, 2007 timeframe. And so doing this, you know, in 2015 was, you know, a huge focus on data. And I think that is what faculty have a hard time grappling with, is this idea that you actually have to get data, not just, you know, grades. You know, getting outcomes-based education is not about grades. It's about, you know, being able, it's about being able to say, what is the student actually learning? And what kind of outcomes do we expect to see based on that learning? So thanks to all of you who are joining us. Please feel free to plug questions into the chat as we're going along. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Manohar and his team at Ioncudos to do a demonstration for us of their software.
Thank you, Terry, and good evening to all of you. And first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Terry and the CHEL for organizing this presentation and creating this platform to meet all of you. It's a wonderful thing, and thank you so much, Terry. Thanks to Melanie, the expert, and had a great privilege of interacting with her earlier. And it is very nice to have you on this session also, ma'am. Thanks, Jordan, for making all the arrangements. And I'm going to put my video off to make sure the bandwidth is available for our
we can all turn our video
conversation.
off for now.
Yes. So, as Terry mentioned, if you have any questions, please put it onto the chat window. We will answer that at the end, right, Terry? At the end, we are going to have question answer session.
Yeah, we'll have plenty of time for questions, indeed.
All right. So I have a few slides to set the context to this demo, and then I have my colleagues here, Mr. Kalim and Mr. Vinay. Both are experts of outcome-based education, and they have got experience of working with hundreds of institutions and implementation experience and so on. All right. So our company, Ion Idea, is a Virginia-based company. We are 25 years in this industry. And apart from software services, we are also having solutions in the space of education, higher education, and safety and security. Since almost it is now 2007, we have been working with higher educational institutions, and we have got more than 100 institutions using our solutions. Today, what we are discussing is Ioncudos. It is curriculum designed for outcome-based education system and also competency-based education. And another solution what we have is Ion EMS, which is student lifecycle software, and another one is digital evaluation software. So you can see some of the universities from Australian universities and Malaysian universities. So various university of different capacities, they're all our customers. And in India and in Malaysia and Australian competencies. So the product has been incorporating all the requirements. Similarly, when we get to work with US institutions, we will customize for the needs, but the implementation has started with ABET in mind. So you can see the right bottom, I'm actually presenting the solution to Dr. Michael Milgan, is the CEO of ABET in one of the forum in Dubai. It was World Engineering Education Forum. And then we have been participating in various international conferences as a presenter, as a paper, publisher, and then as a contributor in terms of sponsoring. And so we also participated in IEEE's Frontiers in Engineering Education, in the World Engineering Education Forum, and in the Indo-US collaboration for engineering education and transformation. So these are all the participations. So today we are discussing about presenting the solution Ioncudos. It has got these modules. It starts from curriculum design, and after the curriculum design is done, the entire lesson plan and all the documentation required for accreditation will be automatically generated, and it will be online. And then the software helps in planning the assessments, your formative and summative assessments, or each question wise, it will help you to connect with course outcomes and program outcomes and Bloom's levels and those kind of things. And then the way how the assessment is conducted in the institution, you can continue. There won't be any change in the existing processes. Then once the student data is available through their examinations or through the assessments, through the rubric or activity assessments, whatever. So when you get that data, the attainment and analysis, the entire continual improvement cycle, okay, the closing the loop, those all mechanism is available. And survey is another, module where you get to hear from all the stakeholders, including students after completing the courses. They will give the feedback, how the course has been, and It is not like a generic survey. Surveys are created with outcomes in the backbone. So course level surveys, course outcomes are used to create the surveys, and program level surveys to various stakeholders using program outcomes in the backbone. Then continuous monitoring and outcomes through various activities of students, including extracurricular activities and so on and so forth. Faculty contribution, that is what faculties, each one in the institution, university, how they are contributing to outcome based education and what are their achievements and their credentials and so on. Everything is captured in the application, in the software, in a centralized manner, and that will help for self assessment or self study report. So this self study report is again a customizable solution. We know that ABET has got 8 clauses or the criteria. So against that, whatever the requirements are there, so we'll customize that, and data whatever is keyed in terms of curriculum design and assessment attainment, those all things will come, and you will generate very consistent SER or SSR. All right, so we all know, as Terry mentioned, about the challenges of manual outcome-based education or competency-based education processes. First of all, the curriculum design itself is a teamwork. So if you take any one cohort, in one semester, there are around 8 courses, and all professors, when they design their course outcomes, collectively it has to make sense to achieve the program outcome intent. What the attributes or the competencies are required by the student to possess, those have to be met. So designing of curriculum, not only for their course but collectively as the for the semester and the program, it's a teamwork. After the curriculum design is done, the documentation, course articulation matrix, program articulation matrix, lesson plans, various documentation, it becomes very difficult for the institution if they do it manually, because every time they have to sit and do the manual documentation. The issue is like, if you make any small change also as part of your continual improvement, the entire documentation undergoes change. That's why, we have seen many universities, institutions will have a lot of aversion to the small changes. So that will lead, there will not be nothing like, a big change that can happen. The small changes put together will cause a transformation. So documentation is, is a burden. And then consistency of usage of taxonomy across the program outcomes and for the formative and summative assessment. So it is very important to practice the proper taxonomy. For example, if you are selecting L3 as a level for that question, and you are using action verbs related to L1 or L2, there should be a mechanism to point it out to the teacher or a professor, saying that this taxonomy, this action verb doesn't belong to L3. So do you want to consider? So that will help throughout the institution across all the programs, usage of taxonomy in a consistent manner. Adequacy of mapping is another thing. Like, it is not just, of course, software provides you the facility, and even accreditation guidelines say that CO to PO mapping, course outcome to program outcome, you can just have a tick, or you can have a strength of mapping. But each course outcome, to what extent it is able to take the responsibility within the PO, because each PO has got several competencies hidden in that. So adequacy of mapping is another part which this tool will take care of. So we will come to those features subsequently. Volume of data, that what Terry's mentioned about, it's a huge thing. Like 10 department university, having each department has got UG PG courses. Each program has got at any given point in time 4 cohorts running. Each one has got 4 semesters and several courses, theory courses, practical courses, the student data. Everything has to be encapsulated as a version of curriculum design till attainment in one particular cohort. So all these things are going to be very difficult to maintain and then generate the report across the programs and across the and comparative analysis and study and those kind of things. So software will take care of all that. So we will go through all those reports and all that. All right. So when we say that it has to be a teamwork. So I have shown here orchestra here. So it is something similar to orchestra. Like each player is very good in playing his or her instrument, but collectively it has to make a music. So in the similar manner, everyone has to contribute in curriculum design. It's not about only their courses, but collectively for achieving the overall objectives and the intent of program outcome. So this is actually a workflow. You can see here the dean of the institution, of course, in collaboration with us. It is one-time setup, the departments, the programs, and what are the various Bloom's levels, taxonomy, everything we set it up at the institution level. And chairman or head of department will create a code for every intake batch, and then the alignment with mission and vision of the university, and then creation of PEOs and mapping it with the POs, aligned to the graduate attributes, and then taking it through the review internally through board of study members, and then mapping PO to PEO. So all these processes are taken care, and then the program coordinator, if there are two programs are there within a department, UG, PG. So UG program owner will get an email or alert, and then upon logging in, he'll be able to define competencies and performance indicators for the program level. And then he'll define the courses and course owner. Each course owner will get an alert, and upon logging in, they'll be able to define the course outcomes mapping to CO to PO, and then creating the lessons and learning outcomes for the lessons, and then mapping and all that kind of thing. Now this is quite a bit of activity for each curriculum, and it becomes very difficult if you do it manual, because as a professor I may be playing many roles. I am teaching my own course, plus I am a board of study member elsewhere. I am also a peer reviewer somewhere, and I'm also a program coordinator. So which all cohorts need what all my attention, and where my action is needed, it becomes very difficult for individual. And at the institution level, the dean or the provost level, it becomes very difficult for them to actually track where is the what is the status, and how we should whether the things are happening in a stipulated time or not. So this provides a very detailed dashboard, which we will come to that in subsequent slide. So when you see about outcome-based education, predominantly there are three systems. One is curriculum design and delivery of lesson, and then assessment of students. Now, our software, which is focused on curriculum design, it doesn't impose any change in the existing processes. That is, delivery of lesson and conducting the assessments through examinations or activities. It may be an already established process in the university. By introducing our software, which is focused on curriculum design, will not impose any change on the existing process, but it will give very comprehensive input. Like a teacher who is walking into a particular lesson will have a complete clarity in the lesson plan in terms of what are the lesson topic learning outcomes, and what are the Bloom's levels, delivery methods, assessment methods, what level it is taught, and what way it is contributing to the higher order outcomes. And very detailed way there will be lesson plan will be available, so that the teaching learning can happen with more clarity and confidence. And then assessment planning for all the formative and summative assessments. Each of the question is tied to course outcomes and program outcomes, and the Bloom's level and things like that, which will help to plan the assessment. And then the process of the established process of conducting the examination will continue as it is. And then after the students examinations are done, the marks are available. their ratings are available if it is done through activities and all that. Those are brought back into our software for calculating the attainment bottom up. The curriculum design happens top down and the attainment happens bottom. So you can see the dotted line. This is the scope of Ioncudos. We actually don't do LMS work. We actually don't do conducting examinations, but rest of the things what you can see in the dotted line, it is there over. So where it helps, we mentioned about, you can see the, I tried to put it in pictorially, a university having several institution campuses, and each one has got several departments and programs and batches. Each batch has got semesters, and each semester has got several courses, and each course is run in maybe ABCD sections. So there should be a visibility at the top from the university to go to a particular course and section and see what the activities are happening. So this solution, in a centralized manner, it gives a complete visibility into the complete activities of OB, and the processes. For example, you can see here the dashboard. It is particular, campus is selected, and particular department and the program and the curriculum, a particular batch, and then the semester. You can see all the courses of that semester, whether the CO definition is done, COPO mapping is done, review, peer review is completed or not, topics have been created, and lesson schedule and review questions, everything is done. So you can see red, amber, green kind of status here. Okay. So similarly, the status is also shown in the dashboard as far as their formative assessment status and summative assessment status, and also the review, conducting of surveys. What is the status of survey at the course level and all that. So in a centralized manner, in one consolidated dashboard, you will see all the status, what's happening. All right, so being this, we are familiar with this, that is program educational objectives. POs are mapped, basically POs coming from graduate attributes are mapped to POs, and course outcomes are mapped to the POs. But we are taking an example of PO3, that is students' ability to design a system, design a component, design processes to meet desired needs. Now in this, there are various elements are there hidden. So these are the competencies: the student's ability to design a system, ability to design a component. These are taught by different courses. In computer science, if I'm teaching Java programming language, probably I may teach about designing of a component, and designing of a system can be, system analysis and designs, course, software engineering, or those kind of things may be on processes. So I should be able to, different course owners, when they create their course outcomes, there should be a mechanism apart from just mapping it to PO3. They can also target certain competencies and certain indicators, so that this will establish more clarity in CO to PO mapping, and thus it will help to show the adequacy of mapping also. Just not a tick between CO to PO, or just not just map and say strength of mapping, but it will give precisely what are the performance indicators and competencies you are addressing through course outcomes. And software will tell that if any competency is not taken by any course owner, or any performance indicator is not targeted. Okay, so software will tell if anything is unmapped and all. So otherwise, manually, it is not possible, very difficult to find the gaps and other things. So this will show up the gaps. And moreover, if the performance indicator is related to a higher order thinking skills and all that, so those things will become your rubric criteria from there. So that way, the rubric what you define for assessing your activities will have a very close connect and mapping to the program level. So that will help you to get a clear lesson plans, clarity in the lesson plan is achieved. For example, it is given here, PO3 itself, competency 1, which is for example, designing solution for complex engineering problem. For that, first competency is demonstrate an ability to generate diverse set of alternative design solutions. So alternate design solution is one of the very important competency one should have. For that, indicators have been put, 1, 2, 3 here. So now I'm teaching system design course, and then I'm defining a course outcome 312, and that course outcome is mapped to these elements. So 312 is also number coined third PO, the first competency, and the second performance indicator it is mapped. So this way, the mapping also becomes very clear and then adequate. Once the mapping is done, and when you even create the formative or summative assessments, mapping of those questions within the assessment occasion, you can map it to course outcome, Bloom's level, and the performance indicator. Now, the moment you create a question paper in the application, or put the question paper into it and map to all those things, what it will help is, it will help you to assess whether the question paper is balanced or not. When I say balanced, institution will have a desire that L1, L2 put together, maybe passing marks may be there, L3, L4 above, on higher order thinking, students should be able to score high. So if that is a desire, every question paper will be checked with respect to the distribution of marks across the Bloom's levels, and it will show what need to be done then and there itself to achieve, take it to the near to the desired distribution. And even course outcomes, there are certain outcomes which are very, the strength of mapping to the program is very high, and if those are completely missed in the question paper, those things also are pointed out, saying that so balance of coverage of course outcome also will be shown in the question paper. So self audit happens, and then the question paper gets submitted to the examination department. So you can see, graphically Bloom's level distribution and course outcome distribution. All right. So before coming to this slide, I would like Dr. Terry, if you could make Vinay as presenter. He will walk us through the application next 15 minutes, and then we can have question answers.
If you stop sharing your screen, he
Sure.
should be able to share his screen.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, Vinay, please go ahead and share your screen.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So hope you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So a very good evening, everyone. So this is the login landing page of our application with an login credentials. I will log in with administrator credentials, wherein I will be having the access to entire application and each and every module. So this is the home page wherein you can see different modules implemented in the application, right? Begin with the dashboard, wherein I can get all the notifications related to my task. If at all any task is been assigned to me, those tasks and the notifications will be sent through emails in the dashboard. So with respect to this action, I can play, whatever the task need to be done for this. So then we have a configuration module wherein I can add the prerequisites data required for every program in an institute or department. Okay, so like how many departments are in the institute, number of programs in the institute. Okay, so generic program outcomes. So as we can see, ABET is in standard wherein many universities will go with the POs which are being adopted by ABET. And similarly in India, we go with the NBA. So we can have all those A to K POs. Similarly in India, 1 to 12 POs, we can have it at one place. Later, these POs will be inherited to every department. And even we have a standard set of delivery methods will be defined at the institute level, which can be further inherited by every department at a course level. So then we have Bloom's domain. As we all know, three main domains. We have cognitive domain, affective and psychomotor, and their level of learning. So each levels and their level of learning will be defined with the and identified with the help of action verbs. So while designing the course outcomes as well as a lesson plan, even at assessment level, with the help of these action words, we can recognize where exactly we are and what we are, defining the questions. So then we have map level weightage, wherein while correlating your outcomes, that is, let's say course outcome to program outcome mapping, at what level we are correlating each outcomes to the program outcome can be identified with the help of this mapping levels. So then we have a curriculum module wherein right from the beginning, like, every department, once they log in, they'll have to add the department vision and mission with the in line with their organization vision and mission. So then we define the curriculum structure, like every intake we will make it as a batch and we call it as a curriculum. The duration of the program will be captured, and every semester, right from the first semester to their eighth semester, all the data will be captured at one place. And for every curriculum will be defining the program educational objectives, and then we'll define the program outcomes. And even we are allowing the coordinators to define the specific outcomes if there are any with respect to their departments. And then we have a program outcome to program educational objectives mapping with a correlation and justification. If at all there is any justification related to the mapping, we can capture the justification. And then we have certain different modules within the curriculum, wherein we can have a set of delivery methods for each curriculum, because delivery methods may change according to the improvement plans what we adopt based on the previous results. So those new delivery methods can be implemented here, and we capture the domains here, what all the domains we have adopted in the department, and different assessment activities. So here, as a coordinator, we will define the different set of activities which are being conducted at a department. So let's say even if we have any standard rubrics for any of the activities such as project works or caption projects, we can define a set of rubrics with the scales. And each criteria will be having their own set of scale of assessment, and these rubrics can be implemented with each course and their activities. And then we define the courses, and each courses will be allocated with the different coordinators who will be teaching the course content. Then a course owner will log in, the course coordinator will log in, and they define the course outcomes and with correlation of the levels, that is Bloom's level. Okay, this course outcome is mapped to level 1, wherein the design happens at a level 1. Similarly, while doing the assessment activities, even we take care of this mapping, whatever the design has happened, the same thing has to be considered in even assessment activities. And even we capture the delivery methods for the each course outcome. And then the course outcome to PO mapping will be done by coordinator, and again with the justification captured for the mapping. Then the lesson plan can also be defined by the coordinators with the topic content. Even we have gone at a granular level, wherein even we can have topic learning outcomes for each topics, and mapping of topics with Bloom's level, as well as we can map it with the delivery methods. And even we can have a lesson schedule, that is portion covered per hour, whatever the things we can capture it here. Similarly, we can do it for experiments, that is practical courses. Then we have different set of reports. You can see various reports have been captured based on the curriculum design. So mapping report, your program articulation matrix. Okay, so but till I just wanted to focus on only one report right now due to time constraints. See, this is the one entire course plan wherein once I done the design as a coordinator, I do design for my course, wherein I can capture it at one place, that is course plan, the details of the course outcomes of my course, and course articulation matrix, course content, and chapter wise plan can also be captured at one place. Okay, so by this, even I can take it in export dot to doc format, and then I can publish it wherever I can. Okay, after this, after design, then we correlate our design with the assessment activities. Here even we can do the extracurricular and co-curricular activities also can also be captured here with the different activities, wherein which are not being addressed through direct assessment. We capture it here with the direct mapping with our program outcomes. So to assess these activities, we can have a set of rubrics. So this is an activity wherein each criteria is mapped with the one or multiple program outcomes, and all these have the criterias, scale of assessment. Okay, and then we have different set of activities for each course, that is occasions, what we call it as assessment activities. Every course owner, every course faculty will have their own set of activities defined. It can be a question paper based assessment, or even some activities such as your workshops, presentations, project works. Those all activities cannot be assessed with the help of question paper. There we can have a rubrics based assessment. Just for example, once we define the question paper here, even the self assessment, as a faculty I can analyze my code, question paper, the question mapping with the course outcome and the Bloom's level, and how the distribution happens, as sir was mentioning about the course coverage, course outcome coverage in the question paper, as well as Bloom's level coverage in the question paper can be audited by a faculty once he defines the question paper, so that I'll get to know whether the question paper is perfect or not. Similarly, we'll define it for end semester examination, that is summative exam. Then in case if we have multiple question paper for summative, or even for formative question paper, we can have an analysis for the question paper, how the distribution has happened in different question paper with respect to course outcome as well as with respect to Bloom's level. As you can see here, I have two sets of question paper, one with the QP1 and another with the QP2, and its distribution. So here the color code indicates the different course outcomes in my course and its percentage distribution with COs. And similarly, you will get to know the Bloom's level distribution within the question paper. So with the help of this particular distribution and coverage, I can get to know which question paper is a better question paper, which I can publish it for actual examination, right? So this is how we give different kinds of analysis of your assessment activities. And once we do the assessment activity, we do get the student marks. Even if we capture here student wise, question wise marks for the better analysis of our course outcome as well as program outcomes. Okay, so before uploading the marks and getting the analysis, we define certain targets, threshold value for every courses. Not only at the course level, even we do at the course outcome level, thresholds can also be set.
Hey, Vinay, I'm just going to interrupt here because we need to save time for our discussion, and I want to give Melanie a few minutes here. So what I'll say is if people want a more in-depth demo, they can always get the demo from you guys. But
Okay.
so I'm going to transition us. If you can stop sharing your screen, we'll go ahead and transition to Melanie. So Melanie, can I ask you to jump in? We already had a few questions in there about course outcomes and how we get there. Do you want to jump in and give us some info based on what we've seen?
Sure. Hi, everybody. And thank you for that demonstration of a software program that can really help track assessment data and help, I think, faculty really see at a granular level how certain assignments are promoting learning and how students are doing overall in a course, and that can be rolled up into program and institutional level data and information. I'd like to just kind of prime the pump a little bit to talk about kind of the purposes of all of this anyway. I think we often think of programs and institutions needing to be accredited for all sorts of reasons, and that can drive practice. And while I think that's a reality for many of our institutions and many of our programs for all sorts of reasons, it's also not the most motivating reason for faculty or even for students to participate in thinking about outcomes and thinking about how we know if students are attaining them, and how we know if they're attaining them at the level we really want them to be, and if they're able to demonstrate that, and if we're able to gather the kind of evidence that we want. I kind of like this way of thinking about assessment, the process of the processes of really reflecting on outcomes using data, as kind of three different models of that. And these three different models, from my perspective and in my practice, have also informed how I've thought about what that means for institutional level or program level assessment that is done through the accreditation process. So one level is assessment of learning. It's a summative approach. It is a measurement paradigm, and it's intended to state the extent to which a person or a group of people in a course or a larger group of people in a program have learned a particular intended learning outcome. I also think there's assessment for learning, and that is a development approach, a developmental improvement-based paradigm. And we can think about this as feedback for improvement, and how we really think about the purposes of using assessment to facilitate that learning in an ongoing developmental kind of scaffolded way. And so I think tools like this one that we just saw can kind of parse those things out. Finally, I like to think of the third kind of area of assessment as learning. And that's when the assessment activity itself is a learning activity and builds on a learning activity and builds on another learning activity. And thus becomes a very lovely integrated model where students are continually learning. And if we move that to a program level or an institutional level, we can think about assessment of learning as kind of that accreditation approval process, and we can think about assessment for learning, that feedback, as the peer review piece of accreditation, which fits in a lot of accreditation agencies. And then we can think of assessment as learning as our self-study. And that's where it's in that paradigm where I think there's a lot of opportunity for community reflection, using data, to really ask the hard questions. How are we doing? How are our students doing? What does that mean for improvements we want to make? And how do we genuinely engage in that continuous improvement process? And so I like that kind of three frameworks, because I think it helps us think about what our intentions are and where we're motivated by this work. And I also think it can help students think about how they can participate in this. I like to engage students in this work. I think they can learn from it. I think they can learn about their own learning, but they can also provide feedback to us to be better. And that makes all of us learners. And I think that's an exciting prospect too. Mm-hmm. So I would just kind of put that out there and see if anyone has any comments or wants to challenge my thinking about that. Terry, maybe you have some comments about that, since we've done some work around this together.
Yeah, well, I had to be kind of won over to this idea, I have to admit.
I had to work on it.
Yes. Well, the problem is, as faculty, we come into this process. Part of the reason I started the Center for Higher Education Leadership, frankly, was that, once I learned all about assessment and how that can actually help you transform your curriculum, I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought about it this way. And so, that one of the first things we actually did as part of the center was we created a guide to assessment, because so many faculty don't know that process. And like I said, when we were starting out today, that whole process of assessment actually was such a useful exercise. I mean, we spent a year at Menlo College just going through this process, putting together the teams for each program area and walking through that process of, it makes you think through, why do we teach this set of courses? Why does this course matter for this program?
Yeah.
And so if you think about it as I think there's too much of a tendency to focus on the assessment side of it and not focusing on the fact that this is an incredible tool to review your curriculum, to review what you expect students to learn from that curriculum, and then to dig into the individual courses. I mean, one of the reasons I like this software is because it doesn't force you, but it allows you to go through and say, what are our goals for this course? What do we want students to learn, and how do we, what do we want to see as the output for that? It took a long time for us to get it through our own heads at Menlo that, it's not just about grades. It's about what students, it's about finding different ways to figure out how students are learning and why students are learning and what they are learning. So, I think it can be incredibly motivating for faculty to be able to sit down and understand it's work. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, we had many long days and
Yeah, it is
figuring
work.
this stuff out, which is why I think using a tool like this is helpful, because once you get it in there, it's in there. And that's something that I think people have to understand in terms of collecting data, is once you get it into a system and then everybody has access to that and can go in and tweak it and upload their courses and have that connectivity, I think that's a really useful thing.
I think what I like about what you just said a lot, and what resonates with my work that I do with institutions, is that it's around kind of intentionality, and that the process itself helped you think about, like, why are we offering that course, right? Like, how does that fit within this framework? Or why am I doing this assignment? Because I love it, or because it's actually promoting and furthering students' development and learning? And so I like that, the model of closing the loop of assessment that I think they spoke to earlier is a really lovely model. And it's also, it's closed, right? You kind of, and so I like this idea of closing the loop, but keeping that loop open and spiraling, because that's how we keep getting better. I think that across the different institutions I've worked with in a variety of roles and capacities, I think people are sometimes very challenged when they see assessment data that doesn't match what they'd like to see, right? And so it's like, it tells a different story than they've had in their head. And that's where I think it's helpful to bring in students and help and garner feedback about, what is, I'm seeing this assessment data. Of course, you would not reveal individual student scores, right? You'd look at that in the aggregate. But you could examine that and kind of pause and ask these kind of reflective questions about the curriculum or the activities or the assignments or the assessments. And also, I think there's a great opportunity to really build in multiple methods for thinking about evidence and assessing learning, so that we have a more equity-minded approach. I'd love to amplify the work that NILOA is doing right now on this. I think it's incredible. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg of where we all need to go. But it's very, very helpful. They just recently put out 3 case studies about how different institutions are really thinking through this. So, like, what are real opportunities for us to think about not just that one final exam at the end of the semester, which is supposed to capture someone's ability or knowledge or skills, but how do we over time design activities that can really support learning in a variety of modes and help a variety of students really demonstrate that learning in different ways. And some disciplines allow themselves, some disciplines that works for better than others, I think. But I also think that it's an extraordinarily valuable activity to build into this entire process.
Yeah, I was at a business college, and this kind of, especially with the accreditation we had, it was important that we have this kind of process in place, because we're dealing not just with thanks, Melanie, National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. I wanted to mention that, but you have different components of courses that have to be able to relate to a business degree, right? And so it's important to show where they are connected to the overall degree. But I want to come back to something somebody asked earlier. I mean, how do you generate? I mean, I know I can tell you the process we use to generate outcomes, but I'm curious, what kind of processes do you see for generating outcomes?
Well, I think that it's an iterative process, and it's a communal process. I think it's best done when it's iterative.
Yeah, that's what we did. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's community based, right? And it's dialogue. It's driven in dialogue.
And also, before I forget, that it's not just students, it's alumni.
Sure.
Who are actually out in the working world and can tell you, this is what worked when I was I took that marketing class, but I didn't learn this, and this.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, absolutely. I think they have incredibly valuable feedback. I also think there's a variety of other constituents, including community partners, prospective employers, maybe internship supervisors or fieldwork supervisors that can also have good insight that can be very helpful. So defining outcomes, I think, is really a process. We often think about what content do we want to teach and what assignments we think are going to promote that kind of content integration. And so backwards design really starts with, what do you want the student to get a way out of this, right? What knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I like that KSA framework, knowledge, skills, and abilities, because that helps kind of differentiate between those two things. And that's a conversation among faculty, including and inclusive of other perspectives, alumni, like you said, Terry, and other constituents that a institution may be engaging with, or a program may be engaging with. And in some cases, accreditors have, if it's some professional accreditors have very prescriptive sets of outcomes. So it's important to pay attention to those, or licensure programs. So some of that, I think, can be very thoughtfully aligned with an institution's mission, with their values, with the needs of their particular student body. And some of it absolutely has to be in line with professional expectations and outcomes, and accreditor expectations and outcomes. But it's not, I think, often the first draft of that outcome set, let's say at a program level, is really a first draft, and it iterates, right? And we have to build data into that iterative process, and we have to build feedback into that, so that we're really saying, is what we want students to get out of this really and at what level, right? We have to articulate kind of the level of or the standards, if we want, a performance, and then find the multiple ways of being able to have students demonstrate that.
Right. And what I like about the model we saw today is that it has that in mind, right? How do we get, and it's not just working backwards from, the program learning outcomes, it's working backwards from, what's, student outcomes, when they go out into the job market. And there's a lot, as you know, there's a ton of discussion at this time around skills-based learning and, this is outcomes-based learning, but also just, lifelong learning. Yeah. And, how we can make these it's an iterative process, not only in the learning process once they're, when students are going through their first round of college, but how do we want to have continuing education, and what should that look like?
Absolutely essential. I think as we are facing the, to borrow a term from one of my favorite books, written by Peter Vail, the permanent whitewater of the 21st century. And we are all in that permanent whitewater right now. We are swimming like this, trying to keep our head above water. But this is really the kind of situation, I think, with COVID-19 and with increasing demands on us personally and professionally, and great disruption in the workforce and great disruption in higher education, where we really need to embody that that continuous learning and that lifelong learning, and need to learn how to learn. And that in and of itself can be a learning outcome, and can be something that is quite intentional, and ultimately becomes kind of a program impact measure, right? I think you can take outcomes and then you move to impacts, and you say, holistically, how did this program or this college really impact not just the individual, but this field or our community or this need in our society?
Yeah, and that's something that our business accreditor was really big on, was having a really good understanding of the impact of our curriculum and our programs, and on the community as well, and how we were, we actually, it made us rethink, oh, we need to be, reaching out to our community, not just, bringing in speakers and so on, but how are we really looking at these issues? And here's a question. Do you think Bloom is the only model that should be used to scale the outcomes?
I guess that might be a question for me. I don't. I think it's a helpful framework. It's been updated recently. And I think it only really speaks to a very cognitive way of thinking. And we also, in certain disciplines and in certain areas, we really want to think about other ways, right? We want to think about the affective, for example. And I also have worked with so many faculty over the years who are really kind of stuck with Blooms. Like Bloom only gets them so far in thinking about student learning, and it becomes constraining. And so I think it's one tool of multiple tools in the toolbox to really think about levels of learning and kind of how you target and scaffold and build curriculum. It's a very good one, particularly the updated version of it. And I wouldn't stop there and say this is the one, because in my experience, it can be rather confining, and it doesn't work for all contexts either, or all students, frankly. So I think it's one tool. And a helpful one, especially for beginners with assessment who really want to think about how you build towards something.
Right. I agree with that. I think it's great to start with it. And so, I mean, I know, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Melanie. So many of us are just getting started with all of this, even though it's been around for a while. It seems like every time you have a new dean or a new provost, they're having to relearn all this stuff. So I think it's best to kind of start with this and to minimize complexity in some ways.
It's a great tool for early assessment adopters.
Right. And then as we, I think we're kind of in a wave of, okay, 10 years ago, we were just getting going with this, and now we're really kind of digging in. And this is, and I have to say, I've spent a lot of time reading WASC accreditation letters because I wanted to figure, and everybody's still, at least, 3 or 4 years ago when I was reading all this stuff, everybody's still in the early stages of doing this, at least in this area. And I mean, not everybody, but we're kind of getting going, and I really think there's going to have to be a move towards educating faculty and grad students on these processes. I've been an advocate of that. And
yeah. I mean, I think starting early and often, which is why I like the idea of helping students learn about assessment, and instead of doing it to them, it becomes a community kind of collective practice, and that has to be carefully facilitated, and it has to be taught and scaffolded and supported. But I think ultimately, as you think, like I'm a big advocate of that idea of like helping graduate students learn what this is all about. and build on the knowledge base. It's been, we've been doing this, the whole outcomes-based movement has been in place for more than 30 years. And I think that accreditors are finally really getting there in the last 10-ish years. And we're just kind of, always kind of catching up. And your comment about kind of the turnover is right too, because we're, if there's a lot of turnover, there's also still resistance, and there's resistance in leadership. And I find that very problematic, because it tells me, when I encounter that resistance in campus leadership, that this ongoing process of continuous improvement isn't really important, or comes from some other place than actual, data informed decisions, and comes from another source. And so I really find my motivation is really around, how can I just keep getting better? And institutions that genuinely want to do that are typically better at this, because they value the data and they value the process.
Yeah. But I think, you and I are out there trying to get these institutions to understand how important this stuff is, and we will continue
we're
to
not
do that
alone.
work.
I also like
we're definitely not.
When I work with faculty, I really like to meet them where they are and show them that they're probably already doing a lot of this, but they haven't articulated it in this way. And I've had some great light bulb moments with folks that are like, oh, I didn't know I was doing assessment. And it was almost like they were embarrassed, but it's the other side of the learning coin. How are you going to know how well you're doing if you don't actually take some attempts to measure it and take a look at it?
Yeah, we have to wrap up, but Terrence has a good question. So Melanie, if you know of some good white papers or Manohar on, best practices for scaffolding and facilitation. I mean, obviously our guide to assessment is one component of that, but if there's stuff, we can share that with the folks who signed up for the work. Actually, we'll share it with everybody.
I think Terrence already shared the link to learningoutcomesassessment.org, which is NILOA, the National Institute, and that is rich, full of resources. And there's also an amazing listserv called Assess, run by the University of Kentucky, ASSESS. It's one of the most valuable resources I've had in my career. So I'll point those two things out. They're very United States focused, but I think they're globally relevant.
Yeah, no, all of this stuff. I mean, a lot of the accreditors are international these days, especially like for business colleges and so on. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we're doing these processes. But in any case, this has been fun, and thank you again, Manohar and Vinay and Kaleem and all who are here for joining us. We have to wrap up because we're already past 3 o'clock. But Terrence is posting some of the links in the chat. If you guys are interested, the NILOA link is in there, and then we'll send some of this out with the recording. So this is recorded, and I am Terry Gibbons with the Center for Higher Education and Leadership. Thanks again, everybody, and check us out at www.higheredleads.com. Feel free to come and join in our forum if you have further questions, and we will be happy to share all the resources that we've mentioned in this webinar. So thanks again, and we will see everybody at our next one next month. Every last Thursday of the month, we do our webinars. So have a great, wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.